Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ladies and gentlemen, we're once again together with Brother Leslie Terabesi, otherwise known as Abdul Karim. And we've been discussing some of the aspects of um, things which have gone awry with Al Islam from even the first generation, if you will, after the demise of our beloved Prophet. Salam. Um, and so far, Brother Karim, who's a very well read scholar in Islamic history, jurisprudence, etc., much more familiar with the traditional indoctrination than I am, which from the very get go, after following my conversion in 2005, I think it was, I began to naturally rebel against this indoctrination. I said, something's wrong with it. It's not in keeping with what Allah has placed in my heart, which I came later to understand was this element of our being called fitra. And it's an inherent guidance mechanism. It's the same sort of mechanism that allows us to seek out our mother's breast when we're born and that sort of thing. So there's certain things that we don't have to be taught. We know inherently where to go, at least what direction, and what seems to be more correct than others. And I found that something was wrong with the direction in which traditional Islam was taking, and lo and behold, over the years, I've gotten in touch with all sorts of people who are traditionally oriented and non, who've all come to the same conclusion. Yes, Islam made a wrong turn about 1,200 years ago or so, perhaps even further, and this included serious matters of indoctrination, serious matters of doctrine, if you will, we just use that word. And this has to do with listening more to what is man made interpretations rather than to what is revealed in the blessed Quran, which was revealed to our prophet and which we consider to be the unalterable word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the final word, if you will, that was brought to us to complete what came before and correct what came before. There were certain things that were also similarly misinterpreted in the previous scriptures, mistranslated, perhaps even misrecorded as copies were made over the centuries and over the millennia since we first started following what we consider to be scripture as human beings, seeking our path, the path of return to our Creator. So, Brother Karim has graciously shared of his knowledge and established a couple of things for us which are unalterable. I mean, the facts which he presents are unalterable. This is how it is. Islam made certain mistakes. The early scholars made certain mistakes. Now, whether they made them um, knowingly or unknowingly remains to be seen. Some of them appear to be made knowingly. Others appear to be made just because, hey, that's what Daddy did, so I'm doing what Daddy did. I'm following what our elders told us. All right, and I'm no longer using this to make my own decisions. I'm just following. So, this sort of doctrine of just blind following snuck into Islam as a result of a couple of things, and one of them was the resistance to the use of reason, which Brother Kareem has made very, very clear to us over this past several conversations we had. So the early scholars had a problem with reason, and they said, well, you can't use that. We're the only ones allowed to use that. You just have to believe what we tell you. Well, I heard that before when I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church. I heard it several times since, even when I became a Protestant Christian after leaving the Catholic Church. I heard this thing. And then when I became a Muslim at the age of 55 or so, I'm now 73, um, I heard it again. Well, you just have to follow us. We're the ones who know. I said, oh my God, well, the Muslims have their own priesthood then. Is no different than the clergy in the other major faiths or the rabbis. I know the rabbis are at each other's throats over doctrinal issues, but their bottom line when it comes to the pew sitters is, hey, you believe us. We're the ones who are the interpreters. Well, my own study of the mystery religions led me to this king in Babylon who was called Nimrud. This is the one that Ibrahim apparently had his conversations with, and who the same king who acknowledged that Ibrahim was correct and that he was wrong, but he didn't want to give up his perquisites. He didn't want to give up his benefits from being the what they call the Pitar or the Petar, the P E apostrophe Tar. That's the interpreter of the mysteries, you see. So he was like the Pope in Babylon, and this whole system, including the cardinals, was moved later into the Roman system and adopted by the Romans. And the Romans were very generous because they adopted just about every religion under the sun after they conquered these people to make them feel better about becoming their slaves. So uh, I hope you're following me, dear listeners, because this story, this same archetype, apparently has come into Islam. Now, well, oh, and I know our imams, they don't consider themselves pitars, but they do walk around with a staff, and they do walk around with a special hat, and they like to wear long robes, and hey, I've seen that before in Babylon. Okay, the same thing. Now, the staff's a little bit different. They use a cross. Our people like to use the star and crescent, but hey, I saw that before in Babylon. Okay, it's been there a long time. It's got nothing to do with Islam, but now it's on top of every mosque. So that's another proof, you see, that Islam has been misguided. So we have this problem with reason. I'm not supposed to tell you these things because I'm not supposed to think them. I'm not allowed, you see. It's not permissible. So I have a problem with the traditionalists, you see, and Brother Karim has a problem with the traditionalists as well, and that's what we're discussing. We're discussing this this problem, okay, with our brothers and our sisters who insist that we must believe like them, just like the Catholic this insisted that Jesus was the Son of God. I didn't have to explain it; I just had to believe it. Okay, so these same people said, "Well, I can't use your reason. You can't use your reason, and you have to believe me when I say, well, the Quran contradicts itself, so it's abrogated. Certain things are said in one surah, then it changes and changes and changes again, and my God, we have hundreds of abrogations." Well, I'm thinking here, well, geez, my concept by fitra of Allah is that, hey, Allah's not like me. I make mistakes. Okay. I know I make mistakes, and when I find out I make a mistake, I will admit it, hopefully. Okay. And then try to correct that mistake. My concept of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that Allah doesn't make any mistakes. But I have guys who told me, hey, you can't think, all right, you have to believe what we say. And then the next thing you have to believe is we say Allah made mistakes. I say, oh my God, okay, well, okay, yes, sir. All right, how many times, I mean, how many rukats or rakats do I have to make in order to convince you that I believe you? Okay, all right. I believe you rather than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if I do 300 rak'at. So will you believe me that I believe you? Please. All right. This is a mess. This is a real mess up here in this cerebral pudding, and my cerebral pudding doesn't want to put up with it. And I decided several years ago I'm not going to put up with it anymore. And so now I'm having a conversation with Brother Karim here, and I'm saying, hey, I'm not a traditionally trained scholar, but here's somebody who understands the tradition, who understands what went wrong. And I figured out this was wrong, but he's telling me what and why it went wrong, and when it went wrong, and who made the mistakes, you see, who introduced these ideas. So that's, we've got this problem with not allowed to use the cerebral pudding. We're not allowed to, we have to agree with them that God made mistakes. And then there's one more thing. Hey, we have to go out and grab the sword and cut off the heads if anyone doesn't agree with us. Wow. Wow. I don't remember reading that in the Quran, in the translation. Yusuf Ali's and Muhammad Assad's, and there's one other translation I read. I don't remember reading that in any of those translations, but hey, these guys who told me I can't think and I have to believe them that God makes mistakes are telling me I have to wage war in order to expand the perimeters of al-Islam so it becomes a global endeavor. Well, that's imperialism, isn't it? Isn't that what Rome did and are still doing? Of course it is. Of course it is. So I have a problem with the traditional perspective, and I know that there are brothers and sisters out there who don't embrace all of these things to that extent. These three areas of serious error, they don't embrace them all to that extent. But hey, they're all going to the masjid with the cross and with the star and crescent under it. And that's a pagan symbol. And you say you're not pagans, right? You don't practice idolatry. Well, I'm going to tell you right now what that star and crescent represents. It represents idolatry. It is the mark of evil. It's like a dog going and urinating on a tree and marking its territory. That's what it is. All right. Metaphysically, that's what it is. Magically speaking, that's what it is. And the highest form of magic is to get the person you want to manipulate to accept the illusion, while you're tricking them elsewhere. And this is what's happened to the Ummah. So I know you may not embrace everything I've just said about the traditional perspective, but Brother Karim has established it in this program so far without exception and without any question. These three areas have been very effectively established in the traditional dialogue, the traditional narrative of all you people who are going into the masjid under the star and crescent and bowing down and pretending that you are worshiping in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, I haven't done that in a long time because once I recognized what was taking place, I stopped. Because I don't want to have a problem with the death angel who's going to ask me, why did you go and pray under a pagan symbol? Why did you do that? Why did you go and pray behind ulama who were presenting the lie, you see, and supporting the lie, and telling you to go get vaccinated when you know that it was against your better interest? This is not guidance. Dear brothers and sisters, this is not guidance. Now, I mentioned the concept of Rome here, dear brother Karim, and I want to just mention one or two things more before turning the microphone over to you, because recently I had cause to read that surah again, Rome, however you want to say it. And I come to say, well, okay, I understand that the translation means the Roman, okay? Well, it's like saying al-Islam, or it's like saying Allah, all right? the God, the one and only Roman. Okay, so I went into that. I was looking. Okay, so who's this Roman? Okay, and then I found out. Well, it's an archetype. It's an archetype that's described in there, and it's an archetype that rejects the true guidance. You see, and then becomes an imperialist. Oh my God, am I striking some notes of truth here? I want to nail this heart of error right to the backbones of those who are committing the rakyats underneath this god awful pagan symbol. You see, because that's what we're here about. All right, now you can say these things one way, I can say them another. Okay, so but we're both going in direct. We're both in the same stream. We're both following the same current. Okay, I'm just a different kind of fish. So um, what happens is I have students who are having trouble with Imran Hussein's doctrine that we're going to be making these hadith that say, well, we're going to be making friends and alliance with Rome, and then Rome's going to help us to win, and carry these black flags in, and we're all going to be heroes once Mahdi gets here, and we're going to take Constantinople, and Putin is our buddy, okay, and he's going to help us because he's already in Syria, and look what he's done there for the dear Muslims who are there, brothers and sisters there. And I'm saying no, 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 no. This is not correct because, as one of my colleagues just indicated to me the other day, when I asked him the same question, he said, "Well." I asked him about these hadith. I said, "What do you think about it?" He said, "Well, they're claiming that the prophet could foresee the future. You see, well, the Quran says he can't. You see, so I'm saying, okay, well, is this another era? Seems to be. Seems to me to be. I mean, I'm saying from a geopolitical perspective and a historical perspective, and someone who studied Putin, okay, and some of the deeds that he's committed, I'm saying, well, he's just he's an elegant actor, if you will. And as the director of the KGB, you would expect him to be training actors who are spies all over the world. You see, that's what they do. And I'm saying, well, and Dugan is one of his top advisors, whom Imran Hussein is friends with, um, is a Satanist who worships Aleister Crowley and who is there on an annual basis celebrating this evil man's birthday. So I'm saying, and he's an advisor to Putin, and I'm saying, okay, well, what's going on here? It can't be right. It can't be right because I already know that Putin betrayed Chechens only to manipulate them and take dominion over them. You see, the Chechens are no longer independent. Not that they had any independence under Stalin or the communist regime before Putin, but they have less even now. But they're very good pretenders, you see. And that's something that we have to deal with in Islam because pretenders are hypocrites, you see. And Al Quran has an awful lot to say about hypocrisy. It also has a lot to say about those who follow the hypocrites, you see. And well, they're going to the death angel is going to be asking them, well, why did you follow them? Well, that's because that's what our fathers did. Our fathers followed them, and their fathers followed them, and so forth and so on. And so, my good friend instructor Benjamin Bilal said, "Look, the Quran says that Muhammad confessed to all. It's there in black and white in the ink." And in the non-ink, if you will, of those who memorize these words, and I have to paraphrase because I don't memorize, that he said, I don't know the unseen. I don't know the future any more than you do. And so then we have Hadith saying, well, this is what's going to happen in the future. The prophet said so. So we're back to the same problem, you see. The Hadith says one thing, the Quran says another thing. The Hadith says, oh, one thing over here, the Quran says another thing. Oh, there's abrogation involved. Oh, well, what do you mean? Well, you just have to believe. All right. And so, instead of writing it on the board, I just have to believe. I have to go back and repent and maybe, uh, maybe pray 20 more rakyats and Allah will forgive me for using my brain, you see. So, brother, what do you have to say about the Roman? If I could challenge you in this fashion, I know it's a little bit of a surprise, but hey, that's what conversations are about. And if we had a cup of coffee here, we'd probably have a long one. So, inshallah.
Yeah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Yes, I remember I was struck by the opening of that surah, Room, because it begins by saying that Rome was defeated, but soon will be victorious.
Mm,
And apparently, historically, this was proven to be true.
mm,
So we may not know the future, but Allah knows the future. And here He's telling us directly in the Quran something about the future, something that is going to happen. And the Roman victory was the thing predicted. In terms of the, I'm not sure, can you perhaps rephrase your question? Because you touched on so many things, and
Oh, yes, I
my
did,
first thoughts
didn't
began to race in so many different directions.
I?
So maybe
Well,
you could prioritize it.
let me rephrase it a little bit different. See, the hadith that refers to this relationship of the Ummah with the Romans, uh, in so many words, says we're going to make an alliance with them, okay, and Rome's going to help us to take back Constantinople, and then there's going to be some sort of war afterwards, but the Muslims are going to remain victorious. There's a part of the hadith that says Rome's going to betray the Muslims, but uh, some people tend to leave that one out. You see, when they're talking about this, they leave that out. And what I'm thinking here is, well, there's another part of the Quran that says, well, don't make an alliance with Christians and Jews who make an alliance with each other. Well, if you're making an alliance with Rome, either the Western Roman Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, which is what Imran Hussein is concerned about here, with respect to the movement of the capital of the Eastern Orthodox from Constantinople to Moscow, as it were, later on. Um, you know, he's ignoring the fact that the Quran says don't do that, even though he reminded us all 10 years ago that the Quran told us not to do that. The problem here is whether it's Eastern or Western, the both of those churches, which seem to be at odds with each other, but they're really not. One of the leaders of the Eastern Orthodox Church is the Knights of Malta, sworn to serve the Pope. So, these and the Knights of Malta and the Knights of Columbus and the Freemasons, they're all under the auspices of the Jewish rabbis who run the Kabbalah. And Putin's grandfather served the tables of both Trotsky and Lenin, you see. And he's acknowledged by the rabbis in Jerusalem to be a Jew. And he's under the guidance of the Chabad. You see, the whole entire, the worst mafia in the world is the Jewish Russian mafia. They're run by the Chabad. So please, how are we going to reconcile this with what the Quran says? My concern here, brother, is to relieve those who have the ears to hear, the eyes to see, and the mind to think clearly, to relieve them of this misguidance. Okay, so if it can be reconciled, please reconcile it. If I'm in error, please let's let me force me to apologize to Imran Hussein, and I'll make it clear. I will admit my mistake, but I don't think I'm mistaken. You see, so I hope that helps you. with the gist of my question here.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Right. Well, the first thing I would like to point out, by the way, and I know, by the way, Sheikh Imran Hussein personally. I met him some years ago right here in Malaysia. We even had a few brief discussions. For example, I remember asking him one time, what is the relationship between the Quran and the Sunnah? We were walking towards a hotel where he was going to give a talk, and he thought about it for a while, and then he answered in the following words. And I recall these words almost verbatim. He said, the Quran is absolutely authoritative, but the Sunnah is conditionally authoritative. End of quote. So that to me indicates that he placed the Quran above the Sunnah as a source of authority, which actually is in line with the traditional understanding of the ranking of the roots of the Sharia, as Imam al-Shafi postulated them, as you know, with the Quran in the first place, followed by the Sunnah, then by the Ijma, and then by Ijtihad, and a few other sources of the law afterwards. And also, perhaps I could mention that I recently saw a video in which Sheikh Imran himself claimed that he was personally chased out of a mosque, a masjid, after he said that the Quran is a higher authority than a hadith. So now, what do you make of that? And perhaps one other point I can mention, my friend Sulaiman Duford, who actually he's an American convert also, like
I know
yourself.
Sulaiman.
You know Sulaiman?
Yes, yes.
Oh, there you go.
He's still alive and well, is he?
I have no idea where he is. Last time I had an email from him, I think he was in Indonesia. But anyway, Brother Sulaiman informed me that in one of his recent books, Sheikh Imran reiterated the supremacy of the Quran over the Hadith in his preface or the introduction to the book. So, which I think, if it really happened, and I have no reason to doubt that it did, to think that it didn't happen. If that is the case, then I think that, judging from those three, events, I would think that those three events indicate to me that Sheikh Imran places the Quran above the Sunnah as an authoritative source.
That was my understanding as well, yeah.
Correct. But then again, I do recall also that he was giving some talks in which he was kind of outlining the future based on certain hadiths and with some reference to some Quranic verses. For example, he mentioned that the word duhan, which is the name of one of the surahs, the smoke, Sheikh suggested that this refers to air pollution. So the prevalence of air pollution is one of the signs of the last day. But as I mentioned to a friend or two, I was a little bit puzzled that he seemed to spend so much time on the signs of the last day and trying to. It seemed to me that he was attempting to predict, right? And of course, we know from the Quran that no one knows the future except Allah Ta'ala. Even the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be on him, they didn't have knowledge of this or knowledge of the unseen. So I was a bit puzzled at what I thought was Sheikh's, kind of absorption in hadith, you see. Especially given the other three, events I mentioned earlier that would indicate that he considers the Quran to be the higher authority than the hadith. Now, this brings me to another point that perhaps I should emphasize, which is that you see the Quran and the hadith are two very different sources. Okay.
Yes.
We as Muslims believe that Al-Quran is the literal verbatim word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Now, what is the hadith by comparison? The hadith, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, and all the other books of hadith, they are human narrations by persons who were not prophets. They are referred to as transmitters. Yes. And they did not transmit even the words of the prophet verbatim. Yes. So what we find in the hadith is what is called transmission by meaning, ma'na in Arabic. In other words, only the meaning is purportedly transmitted, but not the exact words of the Prophet, you see.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa, according to a book by Daniel Brown called Rethinking Tradition in Modern Islamic Thought,
Mm-hmm.
Brown, not to be confused with Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown, who is
Yes.
in Washington,
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Brown claims that Imam Abu Hanifa would not accept any hadith unless it was verbatim, in other words, the exact words of the Prophet,
Mm-hmm.
as as a source of Islam, or as authoritative. So
Yeah.
now, if that is the case, and if we apply the same standard to sift reliable hadiths or authentic hadiths from those that are not authentic, and if we
Mm-hmm.
say that in order for a hadith, a human narration, to be considered authentic, it has to be verbatim, or the exact words of the Prophet, then I fear that or let me put it in the form of a question. How
Mm.
many Sahih hadiths do we have if we apply this very strict standard? If we expect a Sahih hadith to be the exact words of the Prophet? To my knowledge, there's not a single such hadith.
Yes.
Although I've read elsewhere, some sources claim that there are 20 or 10, but we are talking, very low numbers here
Yes.
by those who, make this assertion.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, the entire science of the classification of the hadith requires a serious overhaul, because I think it allowed too many hadiths to be classified as authentic, which I fear do not meet the criterion that should be expected of a Sahih authentic hadith, which is that it
Mm-hmm.
should be verbatim, exact words of the Prophet, peace be on him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people come back against this argument by saying that, oh, but Brother Abdul Karim, we have so-called mutawatir hadith, you see.
Mm-hmm.
My response to that is, first of all, that even the mutawatir hadith are not verbatim. A mutawatir hadith is a hadith that has multiple chains of narrations. And there's a second problem here. You see, because if you look at some of the most well-known mutawatir or widely reported hadiths, what do we find? We find that there is even the mutawatir hadiths disagree with one another.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we have the famous mutawatir hadiths, 3 of them, about which the Prophet allegedly, the words that the Prophet allegedly spoke during his last sermon, in which he said,
Mm-hmm.
according to first version, that I am leaving you the Quran. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm leaving you the Quran. That is a mutawatir hadith. There's a second version of this mutawatir hadith, which says that, this is the Sunni version, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
which says, I'm leaving you the Quran and my Sunnah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is also a mutawatir hadith. By the way, Edip Yüksel points this out in his talk on the mutawatir hadith.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the third hadith says, and this is the Shia version of the mutawatir hadith, and that one says that the Prophet allegedly said, I'm leaving you the Quran and the way of the Ahlul Bayt, of the people of my family.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all these are mutawatir hadiths, and they all 3 of them contradict each other. So
Mm-hmm.
how can we take even the mutawatir hadith as authoritative? Although I have to say, unfortunately, there are brothers, I don't know whether I should mention the name here, because this is going to be in the public domain. Perhaps there's no harm in mentioning it, because the video I'm about to refer to is also in the public domain. But brother Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, I recall him, and by the way, I met him. He came to our institute some years ago. We even chatted briefly. But
I shook hand with him on that day.
Well, there you go. Oh, you were there also. Excellent.
Yes, I was there as well.
Excellent.
This
So
was the
now,
celebration of the establishment of his college there in California.
no, I met him in Malaysia. Sorry, I
Yes,
should have said
that's what I meant.
Oh,
In
I see.
KL.
All right.
Yes, I was there.
So great. So he claims that the mutawatir hadith, he doesn't say that they are, verbatim words of the Prophet, but he says that they are revelation. Okay, Wahi.
Oh.
Yeah, this, and in fact, I was so startled after I heard him say that on this YouTube video that I had to get behind a laptop and start writing a response to it. I couldn't help myself. I said, I
Yes,
cannot
yes.
keep silent about this. So I did.
Yes,
Basically,
well, it's your obligation. If you know better, then you'll have to correct it.
because you see, this to me is one of the biggest disasters that transpired in the Muslim intellectual history. This, I refer to it as the second disaster. Remember, I said there were like 4 main steps that really contributed a great deal to the misunderstanding of the Muslims of their religion. So this designation or the treatment of the hadith, in this case mutawatir hadith, as revelation or wahi, is, I find, very, very problematic. Because it is telling us that the words of human beings are equal to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I just don't see how anybody can say this with a straight face. Maybe he was unaware of this.
No, I think that the erroneous assumption is here that the Prophet said these words and they were faithfully transmitted, even though the evidence shows that they were not faithfully transmitted. They're making an assumption that the gist of the meaning is there, and therefore, because the Prophet said it, it's part of the revelation. Well, that's a big jump in reason now, isn't it? I think in terms of what we call al-Islam, I think they're overstepping the bounds of reason there and making with an assumption. And unfortunately, I believe Brother Hamza misspoke.
Yeah, and after I shared this information with a friend, I have a couple of clubs on Clubhouse, and I get various friends and sometimes other people to drop into our rooms. But one of the friends alerted me to another video in which, and I saw the video afterwards. He sent me the link, in which Brother Hamza makes another statement similar to this one, where he claims that there are up to 500 hadiths that are equal. This time he uses the word equal to the Quran. So this was a second shocker that I had, because how can any human narration actually be equal to the words of Allah? This is impossible. But just one more footnote on the subject. This perspective that the hadiths are revelation, wahi, although they have a different name for it, they call it wahi batin, or the hidden revelation, and they refer to the Quran as the wahi zahir, or the manifest revelation. Yet they are both treated as revelation. So if you look on the website of Ibn Baz, who is the reputedly the most knowledgeable scholar, or he should be, because after all he is the Mufti of Saudi Arabia, or was anyway. On his website you read the following statement, that, I quote, "The Sunnah is a part of the Quran." End of quote. A part of the Quran. Exactly. Another shock. So this is in keeping with yeah.
No, you give me a moment here to recover
from
that.
Sure. I better give you a moment, because it gets worse, actually. So
does it? Oh my God!
It certainly does. Okay. The other part is, you can read this also on his website. He says that, I quote, "The Sunnah is inseparable from the Quran." End of quote. Okay. So reiterating the same thing earlier. And point 3, he says that we, the Ummah, Muslim Ummah, it is obligatory on us to, this is the word he uses, and uses the word obligatory, to revere the Sunnah, to revere the Sunnah. Now, one of the meanings of the word revere is to worship. Now,
Yes.
Is he asking us to worship something other than Allah?
Well,
What is going on here? Is he
well,
inviting us?
this is what the Jews and the Romans did when they created Christianity. They uh, they took their ancient mystery religion hero worship, applied it to this man that they called Jesus Christ, and then it made him the object of this reverence. And it's not just reverence; it's worship because he's God, after all. So a similar thing, it seems to me. Now, this is according to the conversation I just had yesterday on this same subject. You see, with the instructor Benjamin Bilal, and he said the Muslims, the early Muslims, have done the same thing with Muhammad. This hagiography has overstepped the bounds. You see, now we want to reverence people. We reverence our parents, for example. You see, as our elders, and especially if they're really decent people who've done their best by us, we want to revere them. There's nothing wrong with this, but this concept of worship goes a step further, and that's equalizing, you see, or attributing an equal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you're going to attribute an equal credential to man made words, you see, what is spoken of in the hadith, with what was revealed by Jibril to the Prophet, this is overstepping the bounds of what we would call reverence. And the word for that in the Greek is it's a type of love called agapeo. I'll say. Now, agapeo is a word that means it's reverence that belongs to the king. You see, not to God, but to the king. As an administrator, as a minister of God's justice in the earth. There's okay, that's all right. We want to have agapeo love for each other if we observe it. I mean, you don't want to give agapeo to a mass murderer, but you want to give it to those who certainly deserve it. This is reverence that we have for our leaders, for our teachers, for our elders, for those in the camp around the campfire who have helped to guide us to become the best person that we possibly can. Yes, we want to have that reverence for them. And of course, we all hold this reverence for our beloved Prophet Muhammad, but to take it beyond there and to elevate him to this pedestal that is untouchable, you see, this is, and then equalize his sunnah with Al Quran. Oh my God, I think that's going beyond the bounds. And the Quran has a lot to say, correct me if I'm wrong, about those who overstep the bounds.
Yes, that's definitely the case. And by the way, Ibn Abbas says two more things that seem to indicate that he is indeed elevating the Sunnah, because he also says that the Sahaba used to glorify the Sunnah. Okay, he uses the word glorify.
Oh,
so
gosh.
now, yeah, in the Quran, I read that we are supposed to glorify Allah. But Ibn Baz is telling us that at least the Sahaba glorified the Sunnah. And then he adds that the great Imams also glorified the Sunnah. So what do you make of this? What more can I say? But I could perhaps add one more point to what you mentioned earlier. The really tragic thing is that the Sunnah was not elevated merely to be an equal of the Quran. I found at least three ways in which the Sunnah or the Hadith were actually elevated above the Quran. In other words, to be a higher authority even than the Quran. And why do I say that? Because the ulama claim, the traditional ulama claim that, and the Arabic term for this is as-sunnah qadiya al-Quran. That means the Sunnah judges the Quran.
Oh dear.
So now, exactly. Oh dear, yes. You can say that again, as we say in Canada. So the Sunnah judges the Quran because it explains the Quran. Now, as if Allah needs assistance in explaining a book that he presents to us as a clear book, has a Kitabul Mubin, and this book, according to these ulama, requires clarification and explanation, even though the book presents itself as the best hadith, Ahsanul Hadith, and they make this claim despite verses in the Quran, a verse in the Quran where Allah says that He also provides not only the best hadith, but also the best tafsir of the best hadith, Ahsanul Tafsir. So are the ulama expecting us to believe that there's a human being out there who can explain better than Allah? Is that what they are expecting us to believe? In fact, there's a report, one Sahaba declared that nobody explains better than Allah.
Yes.
So that is one way in which they reversed the relationship between the Quran and Sunnah and elevated the Sunnah above the Quran. There are two more ways in which this happened. The second way in which the Sunnah was elevated above the Quran was when the ulama agreed that the hadith can, and even a solitary hadith, can abrogate a Quranic verse.
Yeah.
And this took place as early as 660 AD, less than 30 years after the demise of the Prophet, peace be on him.
Oh dear.
This was not a minority opinion, by the way. This was the majority opinion. And for reference, I can cite the book by Taha Jabir al-Wani called Reviving the Balance. And you will find support for this claim there. In fact, that is where I got it from. And Taha Jabir al-Wani is an Al-Azhar PhD graduate scholar of Iraqi background, and he was also one of the chairmen of the Triple IT Institute in Virginia, USA. So a solitary hadith, the words of a human being, can abrogate or cancel the words of Allah. Brother, think about it. What kind of human being is it that has the power to cancel Allah's words?
Well, it's subhuman.
No, this is just unbelievable. But this, brother, this is part of mainstream Sunni tafsir.
Yeah.
This is the part of the mainstream methodology of interpreting the Quran.
Yeah.
This is not an isolated opinion.
This is what you meant by it gets worse.
Yeah, there's one more point.
Oh God! One more.
It's still worse. Yeah, there's one more.
God.
Are you ready for this?
Please. Yes.
So,
I'm not sure. I don't want to be ready, but I don't think I have any choice. Go on.
So not only is the hadith equal to the Quran, not only does the hadith judge the Quran, not only does the hadith abrogate the Quran, the hadith can even replace parts of the Quran. Replace. In other words, replace a ruling from the hadith, a hukum from the hadith, a man-made narration, can replace the ruling of Allah. And let me give you 3 examples of this so-called replacement. 1, the penalty that Allah Ta'ala prescribed in the Quran for adultery was 100 lashes. But some human being replaced it with the penalty of stoning to death. Does this person think he can legislate better than Allah? Do these people think that human beings can overrule and replace the rulings of Allah?
That was the law under Bani Israel of old, apparently. So
yes,
that crept into Islam. Yeah,
correct. And Muhammad Shahrur points this out. The Muslims got this death penalty for adultery from the Old Testament. So now the second example of where the hadith overruled and replaced the ruling of the Quran. There is no penalty specified in the Quran for the so-called crime of blasphemy. None. Yet the hadith prescribes a death penalty, and the ulama also. So once again, human beings are legislating, coming up with legislation that overrules what Allah has legislated on that topic.
Goodness me.
Ibn Taymiyyah in particular, according to my former boss, Dr. Professor Muhammad Hashim Kamali, he writes this in his book called The Hudud Law in Kelantan. Ibn Taymiyyah concluded on the basis of 6 Quranic verses that blasphemy is punishable by death.
Hmm.
As Professor Kamali points out, none of those 6 verses that he cites uh, even mentions the death penalty, let alone blasphemy. Now,
Hmm.
what kind of exegesis is that?
Hmm.
What kind of tafsir is this person using, Ibn
That's
Taymiyyah?
that would be creative tafsir, I would imagine. Yeah.
That's a nice way of putting it, yeah.
Well,
But
let me ask you a question. Did the prophet execute anyone for blasphemy, to your
not to my
knowledge?
knowledge, not to my knowledge.
Hmm. I
And
don't recall anything either. No.
no. And this brings me to the third example of where human beings overruled Allah's legislation,
Hmm.
and that is on the issue of apostasy.
Hmm.
Apostasy is not a crime in the Quran, it is a sin. Thus, Allah prescribes no earthly punishment for apostasy.
Yes. Yes.
But what do the ulama prescribe? Based on a very problematic hadith, which is an
Hmm.
hadith ahad, only one person reported it, Ibn Abbas, and he was a 13-year-old boy when he allegedly heard the Prophet say this, and
Yes.
no one else heard the Prophet say this, which is that the according to the hadith, the Prophet allegedly said that whoever changes his religion, kill him. This is the hadith, the famous
Oh
hadith
dear.
on which the apostasy law is based.
Oh
Now,
dear. That's up on on the authority of one man who was a 13-year-old
one
boy.
man who was a 13-year-old boy at the time that he allegedly heard this hadith,
I see. Hmm.
and the
Well,
hadith was yeah.
I see. Well, that's pretty authoritative, right?
Not only that, brother, there are problems with that hadith. First of
Yes, I
all, the
would
hadith
imagine so. You know.
goes against the Quran, where Allah says there is no
Hmm.
compulsion in religion. What's gotten into these people that suddenly they want to compel all these people to become or remain Muslims? What kind of Muslims are you going to produce if you force people to stay in the deen against their will?
Mm.
Somebody said you are going to produce hypocrites if you are
Of
forcing
course,
people to remain
you'll
Muslims.
you'll produce an army of them. Yeah, there's no force in religion, apparently,
Correct.
according to
Yes.
what I understand.
And
Well, brother, that brings us to the end of our hour. Unless there's something else that you need to tell us.
no, I just want to mention 1 or 2 points about the apostasy hadith. You know, the
Yes,
hadith is
please,
also
please.
contradictory, because if you take it literally, you would have to kill every convert to Islam because all of them changed their religion.
Yes, yes,
You see
indeed, we
how
did.
how absurd this
Yeah,
is. And the other
yeah.
point I want to mention, that the Prophet himself, peace be on him, never
Hmm.
ever put anyone to death for apostasy. So this
Yeah,
is not even a sunnah of the Prophet. You see.
yeah, yeah.
So
Okay.
according to Shahrur, and I don't see any reason to disagree with him, the apostasy hadith was fabricated, I believe,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
enable political rulers and authorities to basically enforce compliance with their regime,
Hmm.
and also to eliminate political opposition. It is a very political hadith,
Yes.
and in fact, Yusuf al-Qaradawi even claims that if it was, or claimed in one YouTube video, that if it
Hmm.
wasn't for that hadith, there would be no Islam today. And that
Hmm.
was also very unbelievable to me, because it seems to suggest that the only reason why we have Islam today is because people are forced to remain in the deen against their will, that they are not Muslims because they are truly desiring it from their
Hmm.
hearts, but rather
Yeah.
they are acting under compulsion. But anyway, so those were the 2
Yeah.
points I wanted to add. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this thing of blasphemy seems to have been expanded to include sectarianism. I mean, if you're not the same sect as I am, I have the right to kill you. And I have not only that, but I have the right to enter your house and take whatever I want because you're a blasphemer. So this is a really serious problem, and I want to thank you for bringing it to our attention because this is um, this is mortal deviation, if I can use that phrase. And I think that the whole preoccupation with the hadith in terms of what I brought up in the beginning of our session here with respect to Rome is also a mortal deviation. And I want to take that up again, if you don't mind, when we reconvene, inshallah, next week, because
Sure.
I don't think we've exhausted this topic and its various subtle permutations, which have their reverberations in the real world, and mortally so. You see. So I want to explore this further with
Inshallah.
the help of Allah and your expertise, and make it very, very clear to those who have the eyes and ears and mind to consider these matters in a truer light. You see, not the light that's reflected through a mud puddle, but a truer light, as close as we possibly can, to what the real meaning is of this entire history of misguidance and fabrications and misunderstandings and the shedding of blood over such things, which should never occur. We have Muslims killing Muslims because of these matters, and we have Muslims who are preparing to kill other Muslims, even at this moment, if they don't agree with them, for this very reason. So I want to thank you once again, dear brother Karim, for joining us and for joining me and for sharing with myself and our listeners what it is that Allah has placed in your mind and joined to your heart by means of bringing both in alignment with the fitra that you were born with, the fitra that He gave you, the fitra that He gave to each and every one of us. May it please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to prosper our endeavor, to prosper the elucidation of truth as best as we possibly can for the sake of ourselves and of our students, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you, brother Omar.
So, with that being said, I will say wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.